Hey everybody, this is Rydo, and we are back to another video game news live stream for Friday, January 30th. We'll do a little bit of warm-up and then we'll jump into the news. First bit of warm-up, I changed a lot. Inherently, I got on a kick of changing some of the settings and everything, so I need to make sure the stream is actually even happening right now. At now a 1-minute delay instead of a 30-second delay, which seems like that's something new that you couldn't do before. The January 1st Wednesday stream happened live, and then in the middle of showing very little news, because nothing is going to happen, no news is going to happen on that New Year weekend. There was some New Year's postcards from mostly Japanese developers that Komatsu was showing off, where Japanese companies, animators will put out Happy New Year's cards. One of the very last ones had a Renaissance style cherub nude lady on it, and while that did not get flagged by YouTube or get my channel deleted, I thought it better not to just sit there in anxiety that it might get processed and flagged at some point, either minutes or hours later, or maybe weeks, months, years later. So I just chose to go ahead and delete what was overall not much of a stream anyways, just so I don't have to live with the anxiety of it. And you know what, that's just a good way to do things, and it is going to be my standard way of doing things going forward, is that if I think that something pops up and gets by my curation, which is not even running right now, I am just going to go ahead and delete the live stream and stop it immediately. And so there are just going to be live streams that are completely, totally deleted, just out of an abundance of safety. Like there's just not any good reason to risk a channel with so much content on it, just because, just in the chance that there is a problem that's going to happen. So I can see the stream is now going. It is now with normal latency. In the case of live streams, I really didn't need ultra low latency or low latency, and because of that, I can now turn on closed captions to be automatically generated, which should be helpful, I think, for a lot of people, although the automatic generated closed captions are not going to be particularly accurate with my voice, almost certainly, or my improper way of pronouncing a lot of things. I also have my door open, just didn't close it, so there might be a slightly different echo or room tone feel to today's stream. That won't stay consistent, but yeah, I just didn't want to get up and walk over and close the door. And currently, I'm in a situation where there is unlikely going to be any noise caused by that, so I'm fine there. So once I started to get on this kick, let's start scrolling down the SteamDB concurrent playtime. Seems like there's a lot of bots and players playing CS2 right now. Yeah, seems like maybe the numbers are fairly high. People getting back into playing games, or perhaps playing games right before they have to get back to work. Although at this point, I think people might have gotten back to work, although maybe not. Yeah, I could see potentially extending that, like next week would be when things start to really happen. Um, but in that kick, January 1st is also a good time, and I missed it by one stream, to think about a new refresh and branding of this live stream anyways. And so I was thinking about, this is effectively a podcast, the live streams are. So let's think about some names. I went down a list of video game terms and chose mini game. Not a lot of options there. I could have chose sub game, but the idea of sub has a negative connotation, where mini has less of a negative connotation. Now, minigame doesn't inherently make a lot of sense. It's just a name, minigame podcast, as in this is the minigame, the unimportant part of what my channel should be, and the pre-recorded footage, once it starts airing and showing more and more, once I start airing content again, that should be the main game equivalent. So yeah, minigame podcast. Now, once I started to put that in the podcast playlist I already had, I recognized that I had already made a name for the podcast and just wasn't using it. The podcast playlist is called What's New with Rydo, and yeah, that's perhaps not descriptive enough of a title, so theoretically this would be the second official podcast name change, whereas there is also an argument to be made that playing Hearthstone had a different title, playing Magic the Gathering had a different title, playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel had a different title. I'm not sure if there was any other card games that I live streamed, so this could be the fifth title change in perhaps as many years. But I think all of those are also fairly different too, as far as how much I've changed when I'm streaming. We're still, even on January 3rd, not going to have a ton of news, but we are starting to warm up and have more news happen. So I do imagine by the 6th that there will be we'll be back to what we could expect for the rest of January, as far as the amount of content you usually get in January around video game and news. I did have a thought of moving this podcast out of the category of gaming completely and putting it in the news category, news and politics category is how it's labeled on YouTube. I don't think I really want to do that. Even though this is video game news, it is still very much focused exclusively on video game news. Enough that I think gaming is the better label. I also had some groceries delivered, and I'm not sure I told this story. This is more personal life story. But the last time I had groceries delivered was right around that Christmas season, and a massive amount of the food that I ordered was charged to me but not delivered. I can report today that now that we're outside of those holiday workers being employed, I imagine, I got an order with exactly everything I ordered, nothing extra, nothing missing. That being said, they probably spent a little bit of extra time to make sure that was the case, after having to refund nearly a third of the grocery order. And yeah, that's a issue that may very well be a growing issue if we think about it, as potentially more and more things get delivered and less things are just relying on people going to the store and picking it up themselves. But food delivery has always been the way smarter way to do things, and this is a great example where capitalism gets in the way of just pragmatic practicalness. It would be way easier for food these days to be delivered by, say, the post office, and there was a time in which a lot of food was delivered that way. You had a milkman, and you would simply put an order in with the milkman as far as what is to be delivered when he comes around every day or a couple of days. And the milkman would deliver milk, and he would deliver cheeses and probably a couple other things. And the only difference, the big difference there certainly is a milkman and milk truck was only delivering a few things, whereas nowadays refrigerated trucks could easily deliver everything. And that would be so much more efficient than having giant refrigerated buildings with massive amounts of food that leads to massive amounts of food waste, which leads to prices staying very high, which is part of why capitalism corrupts. If it were just a, not even universal basic income, but just universal basic nutrition, just that as a government you pay taxes, as a citizen or somebody working in a country, you pay taxes, and as part of those taxes you get a food credit, food stamps type program for all, and food is just delivered by the post office based on that. You go to a website, you place your orders, you get it. There would be considerably cheaper. Overall, that would cost considerably less, and it would be more nutritious because there would almost certainly be some nutritional requirements put in there. Plus, there wouldn't be a motivating factor to fill things with either wood pulp, so it is cheaper, or sugar, so it's more addictive. Inherently, that then leads to a national security issue if your citizenry is less addicted to sugar and better fed, more muscle, then you have a better standing army, more mentally alert and clear standing army. It leads to better education in kids. It leads to better innovations coming from your country versus another country. All just by fixing the fact that grocery stores are really a blight on the land and take up a massive amount of space that could be used for making even more housing, more comfortable housing, or simply having more parks and trees to offset carbon output. But unfortunately, we're not anywhere to that point, and no country has even begun to suggest such a thing, even though it could be done fairly easily. The closest we ever got to anything like that was the awful response in like China, where the COVID pandemic, they were locking people in the buildings, and then they were supposed to be delivering food to them, but they weren't really delivering food to them enough. We do see some level of efficiency from FEMA when there are hurricanes and things like that, as far as how well the Red Cross and FEMA and all of those organizations can coordinate food delivery. But yeah, that's pretty much a completely different system. And so that's, I guess, my little rant for today. I can't even remember what got me on that. On the good news is I'm continuing to make a big amount of progress cleaning my house and organizing it. Although I have, in fairness, let me bring this up. I just want to chill here for a second. I have been spending a lot of time playing with my new Ninja Sense food processor blender combo, and I'm now trying to bring it up as far as where it, so I can show it off. Let's see, products, countertop appliances, I guess, blenders and kitchen systems. Okay, let's click on that. Oh, what in the world? Why did that just take me back to the front page? Okay. So, Ninja's newest line of products are these blend sets, and the biggest complaint is that I would say that it doesn't come with a case for its accessories that I can have so much. But I got this Ninja Detect Kitchen System Power Blender Plus Processor Pro with BlendSense technology. There's something in the attachments that may be as simple as some magnets that allows it to know when things are attached and allows it to know when what things are attached, it seems. But what you do is, for the most part, you just push the screen in and it goes. And it will blend for a little bit, and it will take frozen berries like this all the way to the top, and it will blend it down into a fine paste pie filling, is what I did. And it will go for a bit, and then it will stop to let things settle, then it will go for a bit, and it will stop. Makes a milkshake to the level of a Frosty, so is closer to, I would say, a smoothie in its sense mode. If you wanted it thicker, I would stop it about halfway. It has a cookie dough. Now, weirdly, it doesn't say it could make like cake dough or blend and mix like a mixing bowl for cake dough. I think with its dough attachment in the food processor, it probably can. It has 3 settings as far as large chop and small chop, as far as when you have the food processor adjust. But it always goes in a timer mode, except for unless you have it in manual mode. So there's almost no chance you could ever burn out this motor, because it's just going to go for a little bit and then it's going to stop. It can detect whether ingredients are fresh or frozen. It claims a lot, but it's actually pretty dumbed down in its modes. It has like three or four modes for the food processor, and the blend is really just like, do you want it to do one way or the other? I don't think I've looked at the blender in the manual mode section. It also has a pulse button and it has a manual on button, but that's not really what you're getting for it. It detects how much is in there, which is a big deal. It also comes with a smoothie blender cup, and yeah. So in testing this out, I've been able to replace for my uses, perhaps for less people, for other uses it wouldn't work. I've been able to replace a food processor, a blender with glass containers instead of plastic containers, which I don't like glass because it shatters into small, very dangerous bits. A KitchenAid mixer since I only really make cookie dough and cake dough with my KitchenAid mixer, I'm pretty sure that the dough will have no problem mixing in the cake. Although maybe there is a level of stickiness there that would be a problem. And a milkshake blender. So really, it's a massive amount of space saver for me, and it has eliminated like 4 different devices. The blades are extremely sharp. I touched just one of it accidentally to my finger, and it gave me a razor sharp paper cut, which is perhaps more annoying than if I actually bled from it. It only has one reversible disc that they're not even really showing particularly well with the food processor, but it's got what you need. It has a slicing on one side and a shredding on the other. That being said, I guess it is worth mentioning that when you are using the disc and the food processor, and the food processor blade and the disc attachment, there's another one that they're not showing here, that's the dough one. They are half the height of the one that's in the blender, which has like 3 rows of blades, which are not showing that either. So they're not interchangeable, and the disc attachment can't shred cheese for you then to chop it down into smaller bits. So if for some reason you wanted to take like Parmesan and you wanted it into small squares, small centimeter by centimeter cubes, you'd have to dump out, after shredding it with the shredding disc, you'd have to dump it all out into another container, change the blade from the shredding disc stick to the cutting stick, and stick it back in there, which is going to be dirtying a lot. It is fairly tall and fairly big, I will also say. Again, none of this has anything to do with video games, but this has been what I've been looking at. But yeah, this is not an exaggerated size particularly. It is really that tall. The lid is interesting in that it locks into place until you press this release button, and then the handle flips up, and to lock it into place you put the handle down, and you can't release it any other way. So it's pretty secure technology. Sure, it's pretty thick plastic too, so I don't think if you accidentally dropped it you're guaranteed that it's going to break, but you'd also want to be careful. I'm pretty sure it's all dishwasher safe, at least top rack, although this wouldn't fit in the top rack. This is also a fairly large base. Like, this is not really an exaggeration for this guy either. It has nice suction cups that will, as the jerks, suction itself down to the ground, to the table, depending on what surface it is. $230 is not what I paid for it, I will say. I got it on sale for $160. At $200, it is an average deal. At $230, you're paying kind of a premium. So I'd wait for it to be on sale. But it is certainly, with the blend sense, with just you get to press this button and then it will blend for a minute, roughly. And then it will be done. I mean, that's just really amazing that you could set it and forget it on a blender instead of having to look at a blender and focus on it. It definitely is a new generation of technology in a very, what in the past has been a very simplistic device. I wish it had a bit more modes. You can't really get into the weeds of it and say, hey, I want a smoothie, or I'd like to adjust what the smoothie is. I doubt it. It doesn't have Wi-Fi or anything, so I don't think you're ever going to get an update or anything like that. But yeah, thick milkshake versus a thin milkshake would be nice. There is probably some other features that you would just have to figure out yourself. Like if you wanted to, say, whisk eggs, I don't know if you could really do that with the food processor and the dough mixer. Or, I mean, you could probably do it with the blades even and not use the dough mixer if you wanted to. But I'm not sure that would actually add enough air you would be blending eggs in a food processor, probably not heating it up too much to cook the eggs, but it still probably wouldn't be worth doing. Now, I will say, as I get off this rant and this sales promotion, which this is not sponsored by anyway, I wish it was. Wish I'd gotten it for free. Your mileage is going to extremely vary based on whether you ever use a blender or a food processor. If you're just not that much into cooking, this is a top of the line type device. Weird that it's Ninja, but Ninja is trying something new with new technology here, whereas not KitchenAid and other brands are not really doing that. But yeah, if you've never used a food processor in your life, you have no need for one, then fine, you don't need the product. If you don't drink smoothies, then the smoothie cup is probably going to get lost in a drawer. If you don't use the blender, then the blender part is probably going to be lost in some cabinet somewhere. It's also, there is existing storage for previous Ninja blenders, but it will not hold all of the components you would need. Although it might hold enough of them where it wouldn't really matter. What you'd probably end up doing is putting the dough mixing stand away in the case, and then having the blades just stored with the container, the food processor container itself. There isn't a hole that is round at the top of the food processing feed tube, but it is pretty wide for most things. But if you are putting carrots down it, your carrots are going to get kind of wobbly. You may have to cut a carrot in half, and if you wanted perfect circular slices, you may have to put 2 or 3 carrots down the feed tube at once if you were going to do that. But yeah, if you were going to try to get perfect slices on carrots, you wouldn't be using a slicing disc on a food processor anyways. So yeah, that's what I've been focusing on as I'm cleaning and reorganizing my kitchen. And yeah, massive amount of space storage there. That being said, when you get a new device, there is this desire that you want to play with it more. And the more it is out and on the counter, the more you're actually going to play with it and use it. There's thus a chance that you're going to end up taking counter space, which counter space is inherently very precious with any new device until you get a feel of just how much you're really going to use it. I can also say I made a milkshake using I think it was probably a pint, maybe a half gallon, of a smaller entire container of ice cream now that filled up the blender to the top. And yeah, basically 64 ounces of milkshake is too much to make for one person. Yeah, so that there is also a temptation that you have this really large food processing container, you have this really large blender. It's going to take some control to say, hey, I'm only going to fill this up a third, maybe a fourth of where it needs to be of its maximum fill line, just because I don't need to do that too much. I tried the trick of putting soap and water in the blender to clean it itself. You probably are going to have to fill it up with water by over the halfway point if you're going to do that, though, to get it to work. It seems like that will work pretty nicely, but yeah, you have to have the right amount of water. That being said, I also accomplished other things as far as cleaning and decluttering. I haven't just been playing with the blender, but as far as kitchen devices, that was one that was fairly exciting. A little Christmas gift to myself, I suppose. I did also find research that there is a kind of interesting hot water kettle device that will also let you like skim milk and boil eggs in it. It's a Japanese device with just a lot more different settings for making different things at different temperatures, like different kinds of teas at different temperatures is the main thought. But I don't actually drink coffee or teas, and having the device, even though it's relatively cheap, it's only like $50, just to boil eggs in a group of 6 is not a lot. So I'm holding off deciding whether I would ever actually purchase that, based on just how many other people will be around that would want teas or coffee or hot water. It's not really enough water to give you boiling water for anything short of just a ramen packet, which I did order some of those just to see it, but even at that, I still feel like there's a decent chance I just boil water on my countertop oven range instead. That being said, I would need to get a new kettle if I was going to do that. A lot of kettles have plastic around the whistle rim, I noticed, and the one I have is melted around the plastic, and generally I just don't want anything with plastic around heat where it can actually melt. And it's real plastic, it's not like it's silicone or anything like that, so I would suggest looking around anything like a kettle, and if there's plastic around the whistle rim, if there's plastic on the handle, things like that, it's probably getting a little too close to the heat, and it's very possibly melting, very possibly releasing and off-gassing chemicals, making microplastics, just all those little things that if you can avoid them, you're better off avoiding them, just in the high chance that they could in a small way contribute to people getting cancer in the long run. My chart obviously still just going along, although I'm noticing something here, like once human seems to have dropped a lot earlier, whereas it seems like some of these other games have been more consistent in their spots. I don't know if that's really the case or not, but yeah, I don't know if I'm really reading these charts right. But yeah, for the new year, the long-term thing here is I could say, well, I could get rid of all data and we could start over, and then Counter-Strike 2 would just be at 100 points instead of 6,794, but really I should just let it roll for 12 months, and my chart has not been collecting data for that long. I wish I could get it to automatically collect data instead of it being part of the macros that open the news stories for me, which those are still broken. I'm gonna have to work on those over the weekend too. But yeah. Oh yeah, I suppose while I was also working on the kitchen, I can say I've come to realize that my countertop oven, which I have a countertop oven that goes up to 700 watts, its plug gets extremely hot if you turn it to the maximum, and will trip the circuit eventually on the circuit breaker. But more than that, it melts. So it melted one of these circuit breakers. So yeah, I would highly recommend in anything that takes over 1500 watts, which is supposed to be the maximum you can pull in the United States on a 15 amp circuit, which is almost certainly most plugs in your house. I'd highly suggest you go pull out the plugs, look to see if they're actually melting the plastic around it. I had 2 smart plugs which the oven was plugged into, and another countertop griddle was plugged into, and both of those plugs have had massive amounts of heat added to the plastic casing. There's just cracks all along it and melting all along it. So it's not particularly safe. Now, plastic just melts and it's infused with anti-flame retardant chemicals. So you're probably not going to burn down your house. But it's also not a great situation either. Now, most people, when they have an electric oven, it's built in and it's probably on a 240 volt or at the very least in a 20 amp circuit. But I don't know if any of my outlets or if the wiring in the wall or the plugs themselves are designed for that. Plus, there's just a level of cheapness, particularly the smart circuit things. They are designed to be cheap, because they're not going to get hot and melt in 90% of the cases. They're only going to get hot and melt when you plug something that is pulling a massive amount of power. Things like a countertop oven, or maybe a hair dryer, maybe a blender or mixer if you ran it really long. Shop tools, things like that. But yeah, if something is big, I would say be cautious on that. That might also explain why the plugs nowadays are super short on a lot of kitchen top devices, is because they are being built so unsafely that if the cords and wires were longer, then the fire would start in the device instead of in the wall or in the outlet where they can blame somebody else for it. But yeah, that was shocking. That was not something I expected. That being said, I'm also not doing anything about it. I might buy a heavy duty 20 amp surge protector, something that maybe is a little bit more metal so it cools itself and transfers heat away a little bit better. But in most cases, the actual part you plug a plug into in a surge protector power strip is still plastic. It's almost always plastic. I don't know what else you could build it. You can't build it out of metal. It's got to be some kind of insulating material, so it would have to be a better quality plastic for it not to melt. But yeah, there's definitely an argument to not buying the cheapest of the cheap of the power strips, the Amazon basic type power strips. Anyways, that doesn't have anything to do with video games, so let's actually start to focus now that I feel like I'm pretty warmed up today on this Friday. The Steam sale is over, so we are back to the gradient of blues in the backgrounds. There's a kind of interesting surprise in that I saw on Slick Deals that the Steam Deck OLEDs are back in recertified stock, if I can say that correctly. The recertified cheaper Steam Deck OLEDs are back in stock. Another thing I've been looking at is playing with Godot on my cell phone. It's kind of crazy to have the Godot engine where you can actually technically make a game on an Android phone, but you just wouldn't really want to do that without it being on a bigger screen, like a tablet screen with a mouse and keyboard plugged in. That does seem kind of crazy, but yeah, I really don't have time to get into actually doing anything with Godot, but I do have 2 or 3 apps I'm thinking about that if I had free times, I could make. But that kind of sucks. Yeah, I am mourning the fact that I'm very busy right now, particularly doing things that are not in my highest level of desire. But yeah, I'm having to be a little bit more practical in my time management. But once I get the house decluttered and everything set up, I'm hoping to have free time, hopefully by the end of this year, to really get into the case of being able to make pre-recorded footage again and get it scheduled, and also maybe do one of those Godot projects and maybe make an app. Although the app that I think I probably could make in a relatively small amount of time, which is still probably going to be like 6 months, is not really an app that I think I could sell for much of anything. And the more complicated app that I could sell would be straight up just ripping off and cloning a abandonware product, and that would take a lot more time, and honestly I don't think I can actually do it with the current plugins, because this one would need more plugins than are really available on the asset store of the Godot engine. The Godot engine right now is very focused on making video games. So yeah, right now, after Slick Deals, maybe the stock had come back for the 512, but the best deal was in the past $519 for 1 terabyte OLED. Compare that to the, well, the prices may have actually gone up here, but yeah, compare that to $649 for a non-refurbished one, or $549 for the OLED. Did these prices go up? I bet they didn't. Yeah, you are really buying a computer there. So yeah, it is cheaper to buy the 1 terabyte recertified than it is to buy the 512 new. If the 512 was on sale, that would be your best dealing. And the thought still is the case that we're not going to have a major new Steam Deck announced. Although there is also a danger that we may just never have a Steam Deck 2 announced anyways, because I could see Valve not really wanting to be focused on hardware as much, and then if they could just convince 3 or 4 other manufacturers to make products that are similar to the Steam Deck and follow the same stats, then I could see Valve being very happy to say, well, we don't need to make a Steam Deck 2 because here's 3 different companies that we partnered with that make something that is just as good as a Steam Deck 2, and we can just focus on the software in that case. The truth of it is, I guess, that Valve right now has proven themselves pretty decent at making hardware, but they don't inherently have a long history of making hardware to trust that you would want them to become the new Nintendo, where you just go to Valve for Steam Decks. I wouldn't even be surprised if they did go down that way, of them allowing Steam Decks to be more of a generic term, in the same way that Xboxes now are becoming a very generic term, and that everything is a Xbox. But yeah, that might happen. That could happen this year, probably won't, but it also could happen 10 years from now, which wouldn't really matter. But yeah, I don't think we're going to see the Steam Deck 2 any shorter than 6 months from now, and even that is going to come down to just major technological improvements. A lot of that is going to also come down to just the state of the economy. In a lot of ways, it's not going to make a lot of sense if they cannot financially afford to make a Steam Deck 2 that is $550 and significantly better in some way. We may just due to the state of the economy, see a slowdown in all gadgets as far as things being developed. So that's going to bring us to the actual video game news, and for the first time in what feels like 2 or 3 weeks, we actually do have news worth mentioning on Video Games Chronicles. For the most part, I tried to go back to things that I don't think we talked about on Wednesday either, so this should go back to Monday stuff also, or Tuesday stuff. It's still not a lot though, but more. January's PlayStation Plus includes one of last year's high-profile games. Sony has detailed January's free, quote-unquote, free PlayStation Plus games. Which one is the major game, though? Suicide Squad, a game that's pretty much abandoned at this point. I guess that's what they're talking about, is Suicide Squad. And I guess Suicide Squad is technically a high-profile game in that it got talked about a lot, but not in positive terms. So I guess that's a weird thing. Rumors are still flying fast and increasing around the Switch 2. New patent appears ahead of the expected Switch 2 reveal. Now, the thing about patents, it seems like now, is that you can basically file for patents and keep them secret for a long time, and then they have to be officially put out to the public slightly before a product is actually released. Which is weird, because that inherently feels like that makes it more difficult for somebody to challenge a patent as being invalid. But at some point, apparently that became the new thing. The patent filing adds weight to an expectation that it's going to use DLSS style upscaling. The thought here is that while the Switch 2 is not going to be particularly powerful by modern standards, it will be more powerful than the Switch 1, and will have some kind of upscaling so that the assets on the cartridges can be fairly small and take up less space, but then it will upscale to a slightly higher higher resolution. Yeah. This comes from Laura Kate Dale. I can't remember what was the deal with Laura Kate Dale, though. There was something around her. I mean, first of all, if we zoom in here, she is a blue-haired lady, and I'm pretty sure she was a flaming SJW, possibly transgendered. You can click on them. This is Blue Sky, not Twitter. Although, boy, does it just look like Twitter. Accessibility, life exchange, cultural consultant. She was on the Gymquisition, now called Podquisition, I think, at one time. That's probably where I recognize her from. Recognize the name, but yeah, I feel like there was some more controversy around it here, or not. But maybe it wasn't as much a controversy as much as just a general fuzzy memory. Inherently, if I remember any mainstream video game journalist, and it's kind of crazy to even call her that, although she seems to be becoming more mainstream. If I remember any of them, it's almost certainly because of some kind of controversy. Yeah, there probably are a few that just keep their head down and don't run into any controversy, but most of them run into something. Moving on, now Black Myth Wukong's director blames Series S for the Xbox delays. Confusion remains around Wukong Xbox no-show. So we are having a growing case here where the director is probably talking way too much publicly. This is something I had heard, and it's not it's not that terrible of a argument, really, to say that the Xbox Series S is probably making it more difficult to develop games for the Xbox, because Xbox is, I believe, forcing everybody to list their game as being compatible with the Xbox Series S as well as the Series X, and 10 gigabytes of RAM versus 16 gigabytes of RAM can make that difficult. That being said, there is almost certainly optimizations that can be done to Black Myth Wukong to make it fit inside of 10 gigabytes of RAM. That's not unbelievable. It's probably just more work than Black Myth Wukong wants to spend or knows how to spend, and that's another case certainly where Xbox and Microsoft should be supporting and helping games be ported. But certainly I feel like there are other developers that feel the same way, that the Xbox Series S is just hamstringing them. But clearly, if Microsoft is going to say everything is an Xbox, they are going to be very rigid in saying that if you release a game for Xbox, it's going to have to run on the Series S and the Amazon Fire Stick and every other platform that we're going to try and support. And yeah, that is probably going to lead to less adaptation and less games showing up on Xbox in the long run. It is a sad statement, certainly, that the only time now we're talking about Black Myth Wukong is when the director is saying something and causing some minor controversy, where the reality is that the actual enthusiasm for the game and praise for the game has come and gone, and it would be better if the game just fell into the annals of history and wasn't spoken upon again for a while. Which, that's an interesting thought, certainly, that perhaps once the hype cycle is done, once games no longer have anything positive to be said about them and nothing new to be said about them, they really should just disappear, not be talked about. Even games that are constantly getting updates and do have new stuff to talk about them often don't get covered very much. That's probably for the better. Yeah. Stardew Valley has sold more than 40 million copies, is the next story, which this is an example of when the video game journalism does decide they want to talk about a game that's older, is when it sells a number of units or makes a certain amount of money or a certain number of players. When you hit a big number, usually ending in 0, then they want to talk about it. Usually a press release gets made around those metrics. But yeah, it is always very much tied to the financials. Well, it's almost always tied to the financials. We really don't see stories where this game is being appreciated and played by a bunch more people, or people are having a great time, or the reviews for a game have gone up significantly. And yeah, that potentially just doesn't happen also, but it's a shame that we don't get stories like that. Let's see, PlayStation Classic Studios says that it's, quote, dreaming about PS3 emulation. Currently, PS5's PS3 classics are only playable via cloud streaming. I think this is very much a case where the Classic Studios probably has zero influence on the rest of Sony Interactive Entertainment, and actual emulation for the PS3 on the PS5 is never going to happen, although it probably could happen pretty easily. They're just not going to put the resources into it to test and make sure every PS3 game running through their own internal emulator works. That's another thing I've been doing too. I spent a lot of time rewatching Severance. I did not realize that Ben Stiller was directing it, and I question how much he really is involved with that, and because it just doesn't feel like I really trust that he would be the director for it. There is, on a second watch of Severance, perhaps the danger of the show getting a little too weird, and watching it week to week is probably better in this case than watching it in a row. And so, yeah, I can't help but wonder if maybe season 2 is going to be the end of the series and just kind of wrap up things versus what it potentially could be. Like, it also could be a mistake for it to go too long instead of being more focused. Yeah, it almost makes a lot of sense to perhaps reset everything on the second season anyways, like The Good Place. But even The Good Place start to get a little long. Yeah, actually I just don't know what to do with Severance. It's such a weird show. It's gotta stay a little weird, but not too weird. One thing I did recognize about Severance, though, is there's an entire character in that show I'd completely forgotten about. Like, there's the main security officer guy. I completely forgot he existed in the show. Like, I guess he was just boring enough and he didn't really do enough. And uniquely, that character several times says like Jesus as just an exclamation. And in the weirdness of Severance, I'm not sure that Christianity is much of a religion in that world, because it clearly is some kind of alternate world. There is a United States, there is a Delaware. They established that at the very beginning as far as the questions at the very beginning of the first episode, but there is something very significantly different about how the world is outside and how big their company that they work for is and how much it controls. And there definitely is some kind of religious fervor around the company and its founders, not only in the Severance floor, which is in itself its own weird world of nonsense, but in the real world, assuming we even are seeing the real world. Yeah, I feel like there was probably some thoughts. And rewatching the episodes, I also feel like there were some thoughts that they threw out there and then they figured they'd get back to them, so it doesn't feel much as that they are laying down breadcrumbs for a reveal later in the same season, as much as they said something in the first episode and then they go, oh, we should probably get back to that later on. But yeah, that's another thing that I wanted to catch up before the second season happens. I could go on, but I probably need to take a bit of a bathroom break. So let's go ahead and pause the recording, and then I'll be back in about 10 minutes. Okay, I'm back. I actually did shut the door too, so if the room tone now sounds slightly different, that would be the reason. Although I imagine most people, I imagine nobody could tell the difference at all. Yeah, I also thought of, as far as bouncing around back to catching up sections here, as I'm thinking of things that I was actually doing. I'm still playing Pokemon TCG Pocket, still playing Memento Mori also. Haven't gotten around to finishing the Cardcaptor Sakura awful game. Memento Mori is fine doing its events, although the times I'm waking up as far as its daily boosts for one event are not lining up particularly well. It's either late in the evening when nobody really wants to do that boost, or it's right when I'm waking up, or right when I'm about to do something, because usually I wake up and then have to kind of warm myself into being mentally alert to do something. Just waking up drowsy, I guess is the phrase to use. But to get back to Pokemon TCG Pocket, I'm running into a real problem, maybe of my own making, because after you play a game against somebody, you can click the thanks button. I've probably been doing that too much for people who have been quick disconnecting, and it seems to me like they've updated the game now where they are not really telling you that you shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be quick disconnecting because you're not getting rewarded for those games as far as shop tickets goes. And that's really the only reason we want to play against other players right now, is to grind out experience and to grind out shop tickets. Shop tickets more valuable than experience, because experience is seemingly just going to go on forever. I'm at like level 31. I wouldn't be surprised if there is a max level, at which point it's going to become absolutely pointless to grind out experience. But even though I am playing random games in the category labeled I want to challenge, Pokemon is such a simplistic game, clearly designed for younger players and not that good of players, that I'm running into a lot of people that once they see I have a Pikachu EX on the field will just concede the game, which is not quick disconnecting technically, but that's what I mean. It's like I'm just getting a lot of people that are conceding on the first or second turn, and that's not getting me any credit because the game isn't going long enough. Arguably, maybe the game is has to go all the way to the end to get credit, and maybe these are bots that are being added to the game by cheaters, but that wouldn't help anybody anyways, obviously. So I imagine it is just real players conceding as soon as they know they're going to lose. So yeah, there's kind of a lack of sportsmanship and a lack of penalty for conceding early. And I think Pokemon TCG Pocket is going to have to really address that, although clearly they really only care about people buying the cards and owning the cards. They don't really care about people actually playing the game, this new simplified version of the game, which is already short enough. So that there really should be some heavy penalties if you concede. Where it goes, if you concede now, you can't play another game for a minute, and just put a wait timer, maybe matchmaking against other people that are conceding, so you're playing against the other people. Like, maybe just get rid of the concede button altogether. But yeah, I had a real hard time yesterday just getting to the end of games, whether win or loss. It is getting, I think, more annoying. maybe that's a New Year thing. Maybe once people are back to work and school, there'll be less people playing TCG Pocket, which is not a good thing, but maybe less people who are not taking it as serious as they should be. Moving back to Video Games Chronicle news, they are speculating that GTA 6 could generate $1 billion from pre-orders alone. This is a research firm predicting a record-breaking year for GTA. Let's see, what is the research firm? We might as well get the name. DFC Intelligence. Of course, the thing about any research firm is that they can make basically any announcements they want, and if they're wrong, it doesn't matter. It still gets a headline, and that's all anybody cares about. This is an interesting picture on the store. I wonder if that's a hint at something bigger, or if that's just going to be storage. Although inherently you have a screenshot here that shows the two playable characters robbing a store at gunpoint. I wonder if you're even going to be able to do that for very specific types of buildings. Like, obviously we know that GTA 6 is not going to let you go inside every single building in the place, but they may have made specific types of buildings that you can go inside. Convenience stores, banks, things like that. Maybe police stations. I could see in modern times thinking along those lines, as far as could you have a 3D equivalent of procedural generation like a Diablo game, where going into a police station procedurally generates a level that you then run around and just shoot at the police to get them riled up on you, or to, I don't know, get some crime credits, whatever reason you would do that. But yeah, there could be kind of a more single floor third person shooter experience inside of certain buildings. Of course, there's a middle step on GTA games that's a little weird, that you can't just go into the door of a building and then not show what is on the other side of that door, but have it be a way in which you can grind out robbing houses, for instance, if that's something you would want to do. So you just go to the door, you'd hear maybe some sound effects, maybe it'd fade to black and then fade back in, and then you would have gained some cash and gained a star of notoriety in it. But yeah, certainly isn't going to be fulfilling on its promises as far as a screenshot if you never see a shop like this, and you never can go into a shop. I assume this is a shop. In modern times, certainly there could be a lot of different kinds of shops. There could be smoke shops, there could be bars, there could be convenience stores, gas stations, grocery stores, banks, police stations. You wouldn't have schools, obviously, because you don't want to create a school shoot-up simulator. Office buildings, maybe, but probably not. There's perhaps a lot of variety. You could have different convenience fast food station places, and certainly if you started to have interiors in GTA 6, you could slowly patch in more and more interiors that are probably procedurally going to be generated, or they could be very repetitive. Certainly it wouldn't be that crazy that to have every made up McDonald's equivalent of a restaurant look exactly the same on the inside. But that's really where GTA eventually is going to have to go, in my mind, is it's going to have to go inside the buildings, because adding more open world landmass is just not going to be much of a sales point. Of course, GTA itself has this anchor around its neck, in that it's a physics game that has you doing crime, and so unless they at some point let you also potentially play as like an undercover cop or something, then it just is going to have this you're playing as the bad guy feel, which limits certainly your audience by a small amount. And there still is controversy around GTA even today. For glorifying criminal activity. But yeah, I do think to make the games feel bigger and feel next generation, once we're past the point of caring as far as graphics, which these screenshots don't even look particularly that good as far as the level of graphics go. Once you can no longer sell extra copies just because the game looks a little bit more hyper realistic, or once it becomes dangerous to make a game look hyper realistic when you're running around and shooting people, they are going to have to add either new features in the physics or new interiors in the buildings or some other new idea. And I can't help but feel like that is why it takes them so incredibly long to release GTA 6, is because they kind of know that they have to wait long enough to make it feel different from GTA 5 or GTA Online. Yeah, which they have said nothing about the gambling aspects, but I would almost assume that there's going to be casinos, and in those casinos there are going to be blackjack tables, roulette tables, slot machines, things like that you can play with all day. Moving on. Marvel Rivals is adding 4 new characters. The Fantastic Four is set to join Marvel Rivals with a trailer next week. Now, I have to say, the Fantastic Four here that this picture has put out don't feel like a Fantastic Four I particularly recognize. The amount of muscle mass on this guy seems to be really a little bit higher than it should be. Remember, the Fantastic Four or scientist family that went up into space, they weren't bodybuilders. So Johnny Blaze, I think is his name. Yeah, it just doesn't feel like he has any fat on his stomach at all. And it does just almost feel like he has a really tiny hips and way too wide of chest here. And then when you get to Mr. Fantastic over here, like he looks way different than what I would expect from Mr. Fantastic. I don't know if I've ever seen Mr. Fantastic with a big bushy beard and mustache. And if this is even supposed to be all armor, it's just like really wide chest and fairly small hips for a guy. And it's just a weird art style. Then you have the Invisible Woman here, the wife of Mr. Fantastic. Pretty stacked in the chest area too. Fairly small hips again. Big thick thighs. Questionable as to why she's wearing such an armored outfit either. Then you have a robot here that I couldn't even name. And then even the Thing here just feels like he's rounded out a little bit bigger, to be a little bit bigger too than you normally would expect the Thing to be. So yeah, I just feel like they're all off model to give you this more, I don't know what you would call it, this overly muscular, overly broad chest anatomical ratio. And I suppose the Invisible Woman can fly, I think. So her potentially falling off the edge of this flying vehicle maybe is not that dangerous. But it is also kind of weird that they've gone out of their way to have her sitting this way so you can see her legs more. And yeah, I don't feel like any of these faces are particularly great either. Now, what you actually see in the game may be completely different anyways. But I also kind of can't hope. I kind of have a feeling here what has happened is that you've got a Chinese company running Marvel Rivals, or at least helping out in the development of Marvel Rivals, and they have less of a connection to the Fantastic Four and the Marvel Pantheon, and thus they have just hired fairly cheap animators who may be from China and may have more of a Asian style of drawing things. It may also be a case that they started with 3D skeletal animations of the characters, and thus they have just flattened 3D skeletal versions of the characters down to the 2D versions. I'm gonna do a little bit of a search here. Let's do a little research and just look and see if we can find maybe some characters in video. Let's see if we can. Yeah, let's go back to the official trailer. So yeah. Here's the official announcement trailer from March 27th, 2024. And let's see what the other characters look like and see if this is a consistent issue with the other characters. Well, the 2D versions of them looked a little bit different, and that Hulk does look different. So maybe they are going out of their way to try and have a different animation style for all of these characters. I'd say Peter Parker, again, looks like he has fairly broad shoulders and a small hip. So that may be something. I don't know who that character is, so I can't really say. And when you get to like Aquaman, that inherently is going to be potentially a completely different looking character than the movies. But yeah, I don't think this style is prevalent in the comics either. Like the Team Rocket and Groot there look like completely different things. So yeah, it does seem like fairly consistently, particularly in the men, they have very broad shoulders, which leads to them having very broad chests. And then women seem to be kind of exempt from that. If the daughter of Galactus is supposed to be something as far as Marvel Rivals elements, I don't know. Like here, same thing, just very broad chest, very small hips. It definitely seems like it is a standard style, and it definitely just feels off. And yeah. I guess I have to leave it at that, really. That the it does seem like Marvel Rivals is not suffering from the fact that they've got an animator who has created an animation style there. But it is something that really stands out to my eye as far as just that this is far too broad shoulders of characters, far too small hips of characters. And perhaps there's just an inconsistency in the consistency there too, which I can't help but assume that there is some level of that, and that they all started from the same template, and that's why all the male characters look just about the same. Where you could very likely make Peter Parker or Miles, if you're doing the Miles Spider-Man character, fairly small and skinny and scrawny and just more agile and movable there. Because, yeah, he's never really been depicted as being big and buff as a character. It's weird that there isn't more variety there. Moving on, Apple has reportedly stopped production of its $3,500 Vision Pro due to lack of demand. Which, yeah, at that price point, that's no surprise there. I can't help but assume that they knew that was going to happen. I can't think of a single product short of a car that is that expensive and would justify being purchased. Even as far as gadgets for super rich people, most rich people probably don't spend that much themselves and instead get things gifted to them at that price. And in a lot of ways, I guess this is probably a smack back to reality that Apple is making electronic devices that have to have some practicality to them. They aren't making diamond encrusted Rolex watches that have a name brand that justifies such a high price. So it's a failure that almost certainly should have happened, that as far as Apple is concerned. Does this knock back VR and AR adaptation? Sure, but the VR and augmented reality are never going to be adopted anyways. We are just as likely that Gabe Newell's other company with brain control interfaces are going to succeed before VR and augmented reality succeeds. And in my day-to-day life, I could certainly see that if there was a non-surgical way to put on a hat and read my thoughts, while that would be very creepy and there's a lot of privacy concerns, and certainly there's concerns that a device like that, if it could work, might be able to read way more than just directed surface level thoughts. But on a day-to-day basis, if I could put on a hat and have something read my thoughts, that would be way more helpful than putting on VR glasses or augmented reality glasses to present me with information that I can see on the screen already when I want to see something on the screen already. Yeah. And arguably, we probably should just make laws right now, before the technology is here, saying that you cannot make devices to read people's thoughts. Every single sci-fi story around that has turned out bad, and it would certainly be a bad outcome. For as much as the lie detector has been proven to not be really effective, and that's why it's not admissible in court, we have had decades of theatrics in which police use lie detectors to convince people to confess, whether they're guilty or not, and trick people. The second that there is a thought that there even is a device that can read somebody's thoughts, you're going to see governments and police use that as a way of saying, we read your thoughts, we know you're guilty. And yeah, most of it will be BS for a while, and yet it will be instilled, much like how CSI TV shows instilled a undue amount of confidence in evidence. It'll be instilled into jury pools, who will once again convict people who shouldn't be convicted. But yeah, that's a long rant. But yeah, VR, augmented reality. And we don't even have it in cars consistently, where it kind of makes sense. And augmented reality in cars kind of makes sense, although cars just driving themselves also kind of makes sense. But yeah, we don't even have screens that project directly up on the window to show us information. And you would think if augmented reality really was helpful and needed, that's the first place you'd start to see it added to. Very expensive devices like cars, where you're already paying tens of thousands of dollars. Moving on. Apparently, Xbox turned down a big franchise crossover for Secret Level. Secret Level's creative team says they asked for the rights to virtually every large game. Now, I only was able to sit through like 2 episodes of Secret Level before I lost interest, and I'm not sure what Secret Level really is trying to accomplish by making episodes of animated stuff based off video games. It feels to me like in this modern time, particularly since Secret Level is on Amazon Prime, watching an episode of a game on Secret Level should probably end with a QR code that says click on this QR code to buy this game on Amazon.com or to get this game on Prime Gaming for free or something. It feels like there should be some kind of integrated thing there where they drop a Secret Level episode to announce and advertise a free game on Prime Gaming or some in-game skin or in-game content. That Secret Level should funnel its audience back to the game. But even if they did do that, then the experience in the game is probably going to be significantly different than what you see in the animation. So it's basically just going to be a 30-minute long fake trailer, false advertisement, if you did something like that. Otherwise, the way they're doing it, what Secret Level's animators are effectively asking is, can we steal all of your ideas you already own, have created and polished, and make a 30-minute episode out of it so we don't have to do any writing? And a lot of people clearly said yes to that, but that inherently, I think, is why Secret Level is worse than Love and Death and Robots, or whatever, the Netflix series from the same creators, it seems. Those episodes had to be written and thought through and had to have some passion around it, where this is just kind of plagiarism, for lack of a better term. And yeah, I just don't think gamers inherently want to sit through a 30-minute cutscene, and I don't think non-gamers would want to sit through a 30-minute cutscene. Yeah, there aren't going to be very many scenarios where like a parent lets you watch a Halo 30-minute cutscene and then is encouraged to actually play Halo. Yeah, the two mediums just really aren't that complementary. And in a funny way, it's more so for video games than I think a lot of other mediums. Whereas, like, music is pretty complementary to being movies and TV. It's not that hard to put music into movies and TV. You can't really go backwards in the other direction, though. You can't put movies or TV shows into music other than maybe have custom music made for movies and TV shows that then could be an original soundtrack, which they don't do that very often. But the interactivity of video games just does not really connect well to TV or music, TV or video or movies at all. So yeah, I can't really blame Microsoft for doing that, for not agreeing for that, particularly since if Microsoft proved that if they were going to have a TV show, they wanted a whole TV show around Master Chief, and they did that, and it went very poorly. And almost certainly the same thing for Doom Guy. Well, Doom Guy as a character really doesn't even have much of a personality, so you really couldn't do a whole TV show around him. But yeah, I don't think Microsoft was wrong to deny those offers. Moving on, Helldivers 2 director says he's already planning Arrowhead's next game, which, good, you should always be planning for your next game. In fact, you should probably be planning for your next 2 or 3 games in case only one of them gets funded by a publisher or something changes drastically. That being said, it's also worth pointing out that they want to hear your speculation on what Helldivers 2 follow-up could be, in the sense that they clearly don't have all the ideas set in stone, and that they would just hear other people's speculations and groupthink as to what they wanted and use that, I'm sure, to create something. I would heavily expect the next game from Arrowhead is going to be Helldivers 3, considering how successful Helldivers 2 was. That could be a spin-off, or it could be a completely different franchise. Let's see. The star of the Sonic movie says he could return for Sonic 4. Jim Carrey says he's definitely open to more Sonic. Yeah, well, when I was watching Sonic 2 to try and catch up here, I definitely feel like Jim Carrey really needs to open up a studio, a school for face acting and dramatic acting. Maybe make a master class around it, but honestly, I feel like he should be face to face with actors, giving lessons to them, because there is something to be said on how his level of physicality and moving his face and adjusting his appearance and all that is just not being learned by a lot of actors these days. And you have a lot of deadpan face. A lot of times actors, and I'm going to try real hard not to gender this, but a lot of times it is more vain actors, which all actors are vain. They will test out what is their best angle on camera, and they will test out the faces that they will do on camera, and they will just try and go for those faces and those angles and nothing else. Which just makes them not feel very emotive and makes them feel a little bit more robotic and more like they're doing fashion model poses than doing a actual good level of face acting, which Jim Carrey, I don't know how he figured it out. Perhaps it was because he started on In Living Color and he was on more of a comedic show on stage presenting to an audience further away, where that theatrical acting does tend to make you have to be a little bit louder, a little bit more bombastic, particularly if you're doing comedy like in Living Color. But yeah, he figured it out, and so he really needs to be teaching that. Plus, just I think he probably could teach a lot of actors some ego control too. But yeah, if he ever retires again from acting, his knowledge needs to be passed down. I'm not even, like, even in the screenshot, and I'm not even going to say this guy is a bad face actor. He probably is pretty good being paired up with Jim Carrey as far as a minion. Stone is his name, and he doesn't have enough scenes in one or two. Arguably, Stone as the minion should have been as a character merged into the general character also, where it would have maybe made some sense if he was some kind of sniveling government general that on the outside looks like he has all the authority in the world, but then immediately just snivels and does everything Dr. Robotnik wants. But yeah, you have a fairly generic, decent but not great image here on the screenshot of him just looking at this guy. Now this guy is supposed to be a sniveling guy that's in love with Robotnik. Do you get I totally love Dr. Robotnik here in this image, whereas Jim Carrey here is basically feels like he's looking at a concerned with concern in his eyes as far as how idiotic Stone is in this case. I don't even know what scene this is, or if that's really even the emotions that are supposed to be passed, but yeah. There is a level here where I feel like Jim Carrey's eyes are conveying a lot more than these eyes, which are just kind of looking in that general direction. And that the head turn here and the tilt down more and the shoulders being tilted versus shoulders being here. Of course, that's really getting into the weeds as far as acting goes. Jim Carrey is pretty old. There's a lot of digital de-aging, I imagine, happening. But unfortunately, we also don't have a situation where new actors are being given chances to come up and get new roles. A lot of the older actors are staying around taking new roles. There's just a lot less roles in general as movies continue to flop. But yeah, I can't help but think that Jim Carrey is probably going to have to retire eventually and hopefully pass it on to a new generation of actors. I can't even begin to think of who would be the next kind of Jim Carrey actor. Maybe Stephen Carell or something like that, but those are all pretty old people too. There is also a point to mention here in that the path of being a comedian, stand-up comedian, or even comedic actor to being a dramatic actor is practically non-existent these days. So yeah, that's an issue too, where there's less paths to being actors. Anyways, that's the last of our Video Games Chronicle articles, and we went a lot longer on that news than I thought we would. The good news, or bad news, however you want to take it really, is that there isn't too many Gematsu articles that I saw today. Like, M2 shares new 2025 updates on Alice T branch, Night Striker Gear, and Ubusuna. So various shoot 'em ups are getting updated. I'm seeing several posts on Reddit, which I'm not sure how relevant Reddit is going to be in 2025, where people are saying if this game releases in 2025 or 2024 or 2026, I'll give everybody who comments a copy of the game. Now, inherently, I think these are lies just to get people to comment on their post for karma farming, which should be made just completely disallowed as far as how giveaways go. Although maybe giveaways don't give karma in some subreddits. I think that probably is the case in some subreddits, but yeah, there's definitely a question whether Reddit will be anywhere as relevant by the end of the year this year, although we don't really have a replacement for it either. Honkai Star Rail version 3.0 update launches January 15th. Yeah, if I hadn't gone back a little bit further, this is probably something I covered on the first. And that stream on the first too was basically about an hour's worth of content at most. And yeah, the vast majority of it is just still me rambling. I can't really get around it. Yeah. That's the problem, is that the warm-up and the rambling stuff probably should label it better and try and quarantine it better so it all starts at a pre-show point, but inherently a pre-show in these live streams would be better if they led into something bigger too, where I had bigger content than just talking about news. PlayStation Plus's monthly games lineup for January have been announced. We had already covered this: Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe, and then a Forza and Suicide Squad. Need for Speed Hot Pursuit Remastered, not a Forza. Apologies there. Yeah, I don't think this is really the year either where having subscription services is going to make any more sense or not. Yeah. I don't think anything is going to be improved as far as PlayStation Plus or Xbox this year. Bright Memory Infinite, which I guess is the final version of Bright Memory, is coming to iOS and Android on January 17th. It's currently already available for PS5, Xbox Series, Switch, and PC. At one time, many years ago, Bright Memory, the trailer, was talked as looking like an amazingly very good-looking game made by what, as far as we ever learned, was a small number of people, maybe only one person. And then Bright Memory Infinite came out to less advertisement than it probably deserved, perhaps again because it was a small team with no publisher behind it. And now, a couple years later, Bright Memory Infinite released on Steam November 11th, 2021. Technology and just optimization seems to allow it to be run on a cell phone. Not that it would be a particularly good experience on a cell phone. It can't possibly be particularly good on a cell phone. And this definitely doesn't look particularly good, and I don't know if that's because my bandwidth or what. This is a lot more game than the original Bright Memory had. Yeah, this is an example of how much visuals have improved in the relatively past 5 to 10 years, and they really are just approaching a point where they have to plateau. It's just not going to be that necessary. Bright Memory was very ambitious, certainly. But I can't help but wonder if it also isn't just a failure to spend your time making a mobile version of this instead of making a follow-up game and growing an audience that way. And perhaps because this was a Chinese developer, which I'm pretty sure it was, FYQD Studio, was that the original developer? Let's see if what happens when I click here. Yeah, perhaps because they're a Chinese studio, that their audience, their target audience, is Chinese gamers with phones more than PC or console gaming. But yeah, it definitely just seems like a weird direction to go instead of making a new game. 6 years ago, they announced Bright Memory Infinite. And this is a reboot of Bright Memory Episode 1. But yeah, it is a weird situation, I would say, though, that I do constantly have the desire to see better games on cell phones, but then I also kick the legs out of under anybody that does that by saying it's a waste of time and it just won't play particularly well because there's no input devices. The touchscreen overlay input is just not what anybody wants, nor is there a good enough argument to carry around a PlayStation controller or an Xbox controller to Bluetooth connect to a cell phone to play games. That is also something that's interesting. As far as I can tell, the inputs in the Godot engine, if you're making a application / game for Android, don't have specific separations for the kinds of inputs that a cell phone might have. I'll have to double check, but I'm not sure it can detect tilting, left or right, anything like that. It considers a tap to be a left click mouse button input, a hold to click a right click mouse button input, which is not too off from how everything else considers it, but specific areas being specific tap would require you to just have a clickable object in that area, or a clickable area. It doesn't have to actually be an object that you can see in that area. So I'm not sure that there really is a way to get a exact X or Y location if you need that when something is clicked. So yeah, there's perhaps not as much inputs as you would like. There is room, I think, for a Steam Deck breakdown that would just be a cell phone with 2 touchpads on the left or right. Still probably not good enough, but if you could get something really thin, something you would carry in your pocket with you, something you could put on the back sides of cell phones, that there's just a input back panel of some sort, maybe then you could start to think better about gaming on cell phones. But cell phone manufacturers have a much larger audience than gamers, and we're just never really going to be at a point where gaming is a high priority for cell phone manufacturers to put extra buttons on it. Apple in particular doesn't want to put extra buttons on things. Yeah. So yeah, it is a catch-22 where I do want better games on cell phones and the games to become better on cell phones, but I also don't feel like porting good games that already exist to cell phones works particularly well, or has worked. Maybe it will work at some point, it just hasn't really yet. Moving on, Eternal Strands demo for PC launches January 21st, which I guess Eternal Strands is a new game. Primal Carnage Evolution launches in 2025, quote, we promise, in parentheses. Although, what is the quote, parentheses, we promise, period? Primal Carnage, I think, is a new game. I don't feel like there was a previous game called Primal Carnage. There's a previous arcade game called Primal Rage many years ago. And something else I think called just Carnage. That was a nothing trailer. I suppose a 2D fighting game where it's dinosaurs and monsters as a reboot wouldn't be that interesting. It probably should be done anyways. But then if you were to take it into a 3D environment where you're playing as dinosaurs, capturing cavemen and eating them, there might be something to that. You could certainly flip that Horizon Zero West concept on its end and be the dinosaurs out hunting other dinosaurs. There's something to that thought. And I guess there probably wouldn't be too much animal cruelty complaints if you were playing as an animal hunting another animal, but maybe. Yeah. I guess I should mention that's one more anime I'm still watching is Fire Force. That series is moving a little too fast, and it really just became a fight of the week series. They did have one comedic bit where they snuck up behind a bad guy and hit him with a pipe and then continuously just beat him to bloody pulp with the pipe. But instead of showing any of that, they just have these mice in the foreground standing exactly in the way of you seeing any of it at all. Which is kind of a funny way to end a fight, but also just highlights that the two female secondary characters that were winning the fight are not interesting enough for them to actually show a fighting a whole fight episode around them. And very quickly, I don't even think I'm in the second season, if there is a second season yet. They've got the main protagonist figuring out how to move past the speed of light, and yeah, the power creep is just way too fast for people who are fighting fires with slightly magical fire abilities at the beginning. To be moving past the speed of light is kind of crazy. And it's certainly some pseudoscience nonsense, I would have to admit too. And I don't believe you could ever get any heat source to produce enough heat to project you past the speed of light, or produce enough energy to make you move past the speed of light. Just don't think that would happen, because that would imply that heat transfer is happening in a vacuum with no resistance at a speed faster than heat and electrons and energy moves. Anyways, yeah, I probably would have shorter streams if I just wasn't doing so many other things that are distracting myself off screen, and then talking about the things I'm distracting myself with off screen. Yeah, it is certainly a mess of my own making. But yeah, also I'm just not gonna sit around though and try and spend 8 hours in boredom while cleaning and decluttering. Moving on to the next Gematsu story, a roguelike top-down shooter, Valkyrie Squad, Siege Breakers for PC launches February 6th. I watched a Godot's tutorial, here's another distraction, that showed how to make the very beginnings of a top-down Vampire Survivors-like shooter, and it's just about 2 hours long, and it is a really good tutorial, with the slight exception of the fact that the presenter sometimes mispronounces things, saying subtract instead of subtract. But yeah, if you have any interest in Godot programming, I would say watch that video first, and then maybe watch the tutorial for making Pong, because the Pong one is only about an hour long to make a much more simpler game, but it doesn't go as much into the details of how to use the editor. So this is a Survivors-like game where you have Valkyries, which are probably asset flipped, or even if they're not asset flipped, that they clearly are lewd anime girl type characters. But I think you also have to recognize that, like so many of the games that lean on lewdness, you're really seeing a chibi version of the characters down here that really has no lewdness to it. And then you are, on extremely rare occasions, seeing a kind of live 2D image in the corner or maybe in the menus. But yeah, you also have to temper your expectations in these cases when you see a game that is selling itself slightly on lewdness, and that there's an assumption there that it won't be particularly as good or polished as similar games that aren't trying to sell itself on lewdness. Gameplay mechanics of a Survivors games, though, may be very hard to improve upon, and definitely if you want to play a Vampire Survivors game, you probably should just play Vampire Survivors first and foremost before moving on to anything else. Okay. I'm not sure why this one is open. This one may have been a YouTube short because my macro is so broken. It may have been a YouTube short to make for later. So that'll bring us to Gaming on Linux articles, and it seemed like there were quite a bit today to cover. The Linux user share on Steam ended 2024 on a high note. So the overall operating share for Windows was down 0.5% to 96.10%, although I wonder if there isn't some other operating systems that just lie and say they are Windows to the Steam hardware review program. Linux is up 0.29% and OS X is up 0.22%. So more people going to Linux, more people going to Mac OS, Apple products. That being said, it also has to be pointed out, though, that the vast majority is still Windows. That is in a major reason because SteamOS is just not installable. Bazelite Linux is, but SteamOS is not installable. And SteamOS and Bazelite Linux not really compatible with NVIDIA cards. And since the vast majority of people with older computers not willing to upgrade are going to have NVIDIA cards, moving to Linux is basically a no-go if you're trying to game. I can't help but also imagine that there's just a significant amount of people who have Windows computers for other reasons and happen to play one or two games on Steam, and they are going to make up a big bulk of that 96%. But the number of people using Linux seems, since the Steam Deck released, to be crawling up, where it had mostly plateaued in a percentage wise until you get to this one weird valley here that then jumps up here. And I can't help but wonder if that isn't some kind of peak in new computers being purchased in the January May time. I don't see why you'd get a new computer in May, and I don't see why you would get you get Linux installed on it there. But yeah, it is trending overall much higher as far as the trend line goes after the Steam Deck was released, and it has been only trending even higher since the Steam Deck OLED was released. And so from that February point in which the Steam Deck was released, Valve does kind of have this incentive to try and release a new something or other every February to get another 6 months to a year of enthusiasm to promote Linux more. I'm in a bad situation now. The only thing I have to drink is some basically blackberry juice, water and frozen blackberries, and I had a whole bunch of them and don't really like them. One thing I will say about the Ninja cups is that the lid has kind of a bump that stops it from fully opening, and it doesn't, if you don't push it a little bit harder than you might want to, if you're being really gentle with it, it will just kind of stay half open where you're just about to stick your nose on the bottom of the lid. But yeah, if you just force it all the way, it will open all the way. And I didn't realize that originally, so I was drinking out of it and I'm like, this is a weird sensation where I'm about to just get smoothie on my nose. It's a weird lid overall in that it's not just a circle and has kind of a odd cutout to it. It's fine to drink out of, but I don't know if it's designed to just give a different kind of flow when you're drinking a smoothie versus other kinds of drinks. Yeah, of course, drinking blackberries, they have all kinds of little tiny little seeds that you can't eat, but they get stuck in your teeth too. And there's just a ton of them. So I probably shouldn't drink that, because then I'm going to spend the next 2 minutes just getting blackberry seeds out of my mouth. Moving on. Valorian is a free open source action adventure RPG game. Update 0.17 brings plenty new to explore. I suppose it is worth mentioning that the Godot engine doesn't directly have a way to make games for consoles. That I'm not sure if there's really a perfect official path to do that either, but it does have direct ways to make APKs for Android at least, and I do believe it has ways to make Apple sideload packages, and it can make websites too if you wanted to do that. But yeah, you probably would have to do more research and invest in some dev kits to transfer a Godot engine product to consoles, which still probably isn't that hard. Valve saw record-breaking 19,000 games released on Steam in 2024. So we're continuing to see the number of games being released go up, which means these live streams are inherently going to get longer every single year until Valve decides that they are going to have some more constraints on Steam Direct releases. The question to ask yourself is, if it is 19,003 last year and it was 14,309 the year before in total, were there 5,000 better games or 5,000 more games that were appreciated by anybody on Steam released in 2024, which was a notoriously bad year for games being released as far as new games, but also a pretty bad year as far as just porting old games too. It's not like 5,000 old games got added to the Steam storefront. There is perhaps a desperation amongst asset flippers to try and get more and more money to make up for a loss of sales by releasing more products. And there might just be a whole new wave of desperate people trying to be game developers because they're losing jobs in every other industry. But as far as the consumer side and the gamer side, in no way were there 5,000 games better, or even likely one game that was good enough to justify 4,900 other games being released. So yeah, I definitely am of the case in the opinion that Valve needs to do something, whether it's raise the amount of money, which they certainly could do that. They could say, for games being published via Steam Direct, let's raise the amount from $100 to $200 and see if that affects anybody at all. It would double their money, certainly, for all new published games. This record is not particularly a good record. It doesn't make gamers, in my opinion, happier with Steam and the store. So yeah, I could see them raise the amount of money. I could see them also limit these tags that can be used for certain types of games, or have some kind of automated process that looks at certain types of games and says, hey, we just don't want tower defense games, so you can't submit a tower defense game anymore. And see, weirdly, the only time Valve has done any kind of curation is it's been really on the Japanese adult games, which they do minimal of that even, but they do some of that censorship. And in that case, it really is more censorship than just curation, but you could equally replace curation and censorship in most conversations and be correct using either word. But yeah, the puzzle games probably still sell. The hidden object games probably should be reduced. The clicker games should probably be reduced. If they, one suggestion I think would work fairly well, if they said new games cannot make items to sell on the marketplace because they really don't care about the marketplace these days, that could be very helpful. They could say that Steam Direct games are not eligible to make item drops for the marketplace. That would kill games like Banana and reduce that. And I wouldn't be surprised if there were close to 5,000 Banana clones and clicker games that were released in this year. But yeah, if you close that loophole of games like Banana making item drops for the marketplace for gambling purposes and trading purposes, then you probably could curate pretty easily that way. but also you could certainly say tower defense games have to go through a different process, or games over a certain listing price have to go through a different process. Anything they do would probably get them sued, but they're getting sued anyway, so they might as well try to do something better. It is absolute insanity that they are so hands-off. No other storefront is so hands-off in the physical world, and then when you get to stores like Amazon.com, which is pretty hands-off as far as what they sell, that's not creating a good reputation for Amazon.com either, that there's just a lot of garbage products from third-party sellers on Amazon.com. Let's see. While Palworld was enjoying a resurgence, Valve dropped the rating on the Steam Deck to unsupported, which perhaps that means more reports came in, or maybe the update changed something. Previously it was labeled as playable up until January 1st. Which, it's interesting that any big game that can be named would not have gone out of its, that the Proton would not have gone out of its way to maintain the level of compatibility there, unless they added some kind of issue like a kernel level anti-cheat or something. This certainly isn't a story we've heard before, and certainly it's not a story we want to hear ever again. We want to see games maintain their support level, if not increase it. And in all fairness, it does say that the game still appears to run without any clear technical problems. Perhaps there is just a performance issue, or perhaps there is some kind of input or text on screen issue. The latest Humble Bundle is typing adventures, including the text assist. Which, I guess I'm not really at the point where I get back to buying games through the Humble Bundle, in the sense that I'm not really at the point of buying games at all. I need to get back to playing games and scheduling videos before I start to think about purchasing new games. And I can't do any of that until I get my house in order, basically, literally and figuratively. Half-Life 3 rumors are about again after a teaser from G-Man's voice actor, although it is also worth pointing out that G-Man's voice actor was promoting his, I think, music video or his latest album. So this may be a case where the voice actor is doing a voice that sounds like G-Man. But yeah, I definitely do think it is a possibility that maybe Gabe Newell wants to either retire or release Half-Life 3 before he dies. Just of old age. I don't think he's particularly unhealthy, but I don't know. But yeah, and it certainly, to my mind, makes a lot of sense to release something called Half-Life 3 and just be done with it. And in fact, the source engine at this point is not getting adapted and not getting used well enough to spend as much attention on it as they should be. There is a real argument that Valve could just abandon Source Engine 2 move all of their projects over, probably not to Godot. They'd probably go to Unreal Engine in this case. But yeah, have all their employees learn Unreal Engine, or get new employees that know Unreal Engine and start making and supporting all their current games on a completely new engine instead of making their own source engine. Inherently, Valve could do the physics and all the stuff that they had done with the source engine as just patches to the Unreal Engine, and just something that's way more industry standard. They also could probably get rid of a lot of people who spend way too much time in their day working on the source engine to support Counter-Strike 2 and things like that. It is also very possible that gambling with Counter-Strike 2 and knife skins may finally get shut down completely, and Valve may not be making anywhere as much money as they're used to, and they're just going to have to rethink how they are going to run their business. But yeah, a big part of that would be to just throw out whatever they've been working on as far as it's being labeled as Half-Life X and call it Half-Life 3 and just be done with that. And then maybe you do a full soft reboot on a whole new engine like Unreal, and remake the original games, or move forward to a Half-Life 4 instead of being hamstrung. Or maybe you just end Half-Life with Half-Life 3. I mean, that's not a terrible thought either. The overall concept around Half-Life was to show off what you could do in Source Engine, and you could do that with different games with different names that aren't connected to memes and tied to extremely long delays. Valve is showing an ability to change with the Steam Deck, and I think there might be more change around the bend. And one way to change is to finally just say we don't care that Half-Life 3 isn't going to be the pinnacle of gaming, and it's just going to be a game that can't possibly live up to the hype. So yeah, we could see a Half-Life 3 in 2025. We could also never see a Half-Life 3. Does it really matter in modern times? No. It's just a meme. And that's really all it's ever going to be. Moving on, Soleco won the IndieDB's 2024 Indie Game of the Award, plus a big sales milestone was hit. Over 100,000 sold. I don't know this game. Let's go ahead and click on the Steam link. It is on my follow list. It does just look like a shooter though. It's rated very positively. That one, it's in early access. Prime Gaming for January is listed here. Lots of games for Amazon and good old games. Definitely would not be paying for Prime. I say this every month. I would not be paying for Prime for their free games. Not even because I look at the names. It's just because it's not on Steam. They've made their offering completely worthless to me in that aspect. Plus, Prime Video with ads is kind of worthless too. Well, it's getting less valuable. It's not worthless, but it's getting less valuable, certainly. Then it just comes down to free shipping and subscribe and save type savings. A Slavic fantasy story-driven mystery called The End of the Sun releases in January 29th. One of the screenshots for this game had more of a character, more of a naked dryad type character, so I didn't want to show this, which means also I don't really want to make a YouTube short on it. So, and see, I don't know if she was really naked or not. I'm just, anything that even looks like it might be showing something, I'm gonna try to veer away from as fast as possible, not make YouTube shorts around it, not run into any risk of the YouTube algorithm. Goal number 1 for 2025 is don't get my channel deleted. Even if I am just going to keep the channel in stasis mode and only do live streams, or maybe not even do live streams, and maybe just do YouTube shorts and maybe just never schedule any videos. But goal number 1 is to keep the channel from being deleted. At the very least, until I get around to building my servers and possibly downloading backups. Goal number 2 for 2025 would be nice to find some new places to put my content, but I don't think I'm going to find anything like that unless I'm literally self-hosting the videos. Moving on, Medal of Honor Allied Assault's open source remake is new beta, has gotten a lot of fixes. Interesting project going on here. Marvel Rivals team has issued a statement on recent bans from the Steam Deck and macOS players, which interesting. While Marvel Rivals is officially released for Windows on PC, players on Linux platforms like Steam Deck and Mac have been using compatibility layers like Wine and Proton to play it. Unfortunately, anti-cheat can sometimes trip up on this, and even when players aren't actually using any cheats at all. They have since lifted those bans. Well, that certainly highlights an issue if you are trying to play a new game that you're hyped on, like Marvel Rivals, but it doesn't actually support the Steam Deck, is that any compatibility layers may get you banned. And yeah, we certainly are at a case where official releases for Windows only will be an issue, I think, for a long time, until we get to a point where like SteamOS is just available. And frankly, if SteamOS got so nice that you could install it on a computer, any idiot can install it as much as they could install Windows 10, and it was just so compatible that people that don't even care about gaming are installing SteamOS instead of Windows 11 because they just don't want Windows 11. That would be a nice world to live in, certainly, to get away from Windows. Yeah. And honestly, I think most people would take that trade-off, even if it led to Xbox failing completely and all those gaming companies either getting sold off or going out of business. In the long run, just being no longer hamstrung by having to use Windows as much might be worth it for all of society, particularly when there is a big question as far as any of the acquired companies and Microsoft doing anything great ever again before the employees there just get laid off. Fanatical has a Monster Hunter bundle, which seems to include Monster Hunter Rise, Monster Hunter World, and a bunch of expansions and DLC for those two games. I didn't think there was too many Monster Hunter games. And this feels like this is just the exact same story as far as games. I saw a poster for Wall-E 2. I'm not sure it's real, but it seems like Eve was given legs in the poster, if it's true, which I don't know why you would change Eve up like that instead of just having her look exactly the same way she did in the first movie. It'd be kind of crazy to change her just to give her legs. And then Linux on Gaming, or gamingonlinux.com is the name of the website, has the most popular Linux gaming articles of 2024, which does, for this first year of following them, which I've only been following them really for a couple months, show me just overall what people who are looking at his website are really interested in. This Aya Neo came and went apparently. And then Hollow OS, Hollow ISO, also seems like it was dead. This new immutable version also seems like it hasn't been updated in months. Donating the Mono project to the Wine team in the long run might be very helpful for compatibility, but it is also arguably just a case where that is just going to put Mono as a project in stasis in the long run, perhaps making it more difficult to have a compatibility layer for probably more apps than games on Linux. And a lot of apps just need to be replaced with better apps, newer apps, instead of compatibility layers. Some games like Roblox blocking the Linux and Steam Deck. Big changes certainly with Valve being in direct collaboration with Arc Linux, although we haven't heard anything new from this since this was announced. Big changes certainly with Nintendo going after mini emulators. Anti-cheat certainly talked about a lot. I'm not sure if Unified Linux Wine Gaming Launcher is particularly that necessary. Yeah. They hit 13,000 games playable and verified for the Steam Deck, which 13,000 is not enough, certainly when 5,000 more games were added on top of how many games were added last year to Steam. It definitely isn't a one-to-one comparison. That being said, the number of ones that have been labeled as playable and verified and reported on is probably just a drop in the bucket compared to how many 3D hidden object games and visual novels that would work perfectly fine on Steam, although we just don't know. Valve saying that they're still waiting for a generational leap for the Steam Deck 2, but it's coming. Which honestly, a generational leap could be achieved just by putting slightly newer hardware in it. I mean, honestly, if they just put a newer Bluetooth protocol chip in it, they could claim a generational leap in that case. It's been apparently 6 years since Valve announced Steam Play Proton for Linux. So, yeah, while 2024 was the year of most people hearing about Proton and talking about Proton, there was 5 years before that of setup. Boy, does that really highlight the problem with programming, that you really have to be a game developer getting a paycheck to work on, to then be able to afford to work on side projects like Proton, or you have to be independently wealthy some other way. But yeah, 5 years for something as ambitious as Proton is not crazy. Yeah. And SteamOS, without its newest version moving to Arch Linux, probably would have failed. I mean, it really was not going anywhere with its first two versions. Now notice here, as far as all the big news, the family share issue has not been talked about as much, or really had anything done with it as much. And that seems kind of crazy that is an issue here. But yeah, it is kind of crazy that there isn't more enthusiasm around family share, and that isn't more of a sales pitch. But I guess in the practical real world experience, family sharing is just not something that has been promoted or embraced enough by gamers. And then I guess this is probably an update to a previous story. Palworld is now labeled as playable, but with multiple listed problems. So at least they did get an update. Let's see. Which perhaps that means that games are going to be held to a higher standard as far as inputs. And that you have to be able to control some things, and that you can't show mouse or keyboard or non-Steam Deck icons, and you can't make the text too small, or requiring manual configurations of graphic settings before you can launch, and not defaulting to external Bluetooth USB controllers on the deck. So I can't help but feel like that Steam is making an example out of Palworld to say that they are going to name and shame things that are problems. And I can't help but wonder if maybe this is going to be a fairly automated process, in that certain checks are going to be run automatically, and if those checks don't pass, you are going to get just back a long list of issues that may lower the playability rating of your game. Not that playability ratings are going to affect too much, but it might affect whether or not somebody even tries to play the game. Yeah. Here's that game, Valkyrie Squad Breakers. And gamedeveloper.com, I'm not sure particularly this week why I'm keeping them around, because they have really only maybe 2 stories. Stardew Valley has topped 41 million lifetime sales. We'd already kind of talked about that. And Tango Gameworks has been reborn as Tango Gameworks Incorporated, which they are still owned by Krafton, and I think most of the employees were fired from the original Tango Gameworks and rehired by Krafton. That being said, this is the exception to what otherwise would have been a horrible year of companies being shut down and people being laid off. And yeah, I don't see a real reason to expect much different in 2025. Inherently, I think economically a bubble needs to burst and to reset expectations. New financial reporting laws need to be put in place, which that's unlikely to happen in the United States at least, and perhaps just overall financial expectations and fiduciary duties need to be redefined as something other than you have to make as much money as possible always for shareholders, which that kind of rule of law would probably never pass either. So yeah, the only thing is a bubble could burst and maybe economics would reset itself somewhat, but maybe not. Of course, the entire economic system could also collapse and reset things. That wouldn't be good for society or video games in the short run, at least, but it is definitely a possibility. Alright, and then that's going to bring us to all new games on Steam, which, again, my curation is not happening because my macros are broken because I did the stupid thing of updating UI Vision when I should have just left it. And I said the exact same thing last time I tried this and still didn't learn my lesson. I'm just going to have to live with the big bugginess of the old versions over the bugginess of the new version because neither one seems to work. Maybe I could go back and try and install an even older version. Maybe that would work, but I don't even know if I can find that. But I definitely need to have the macros actually open the things, the games and news stories, because it's wasting my time otherwise. I kind of wish the whole thing was scheduled to run too. It would be nice to wake up at any time on a Monday, Wednesday, or Friday, which I'm still planning on streaming on those days. Yeah, it would be nice to just wake up and have all the news articles open and arranged. And that's how you do it in a newsroom, is that you would have some kind of intern coming in earlier. See, I went back to January 1st and we can see some of these games already are on the fall list. I'll give this one a chance. And yeah, still not really doing any fall list cleanup. School teacher simulator. Still doesn't make any sense to me why you would want to simulate the job of being a school teacher. I saw a clip of Linus Tech Tips talking about this proposed charter school that would have AI teachers and AI generated teaching. Sounded like pretty much a excuse to fire humans more than anything and just have what would probably promise to be a better experience but actually deliver a much worse experience. One of the things about schools and teaching is that you cannot judge a school fairly by highlighting all the successes and ignoring all the kids that got expelled or kicked out or that fell behind. You have to basically judge schools based on its failures and focus and hyper focus on its failures to teach. Because yes, a perfect student, probably with very little guidance, will always get high test scores and excel and succeed in what's being asked of them. No surprise there. The work, the actual work that needs to be done is getting these students that are struggling to understand things, getting these students that are struggling to even show up to school. And I can't help but assume that charter schools and private schools go out of their way to manipulate their records by expelling or bullying students out of being there. So yeah, and that's not even an issue. I think it's not even really addressing the issue that AI right now is just not accurate. So if we got to a point where AI was 100% accurate and it was only being fed data that is scientifically proven to be correct, then that would be something different, but we're nowhere close to that. The whole hallucination stuff, the whole just repeating lies, AI slop is just way too prevalent to even begin to try to have AI in education. Yeah, that's not even really addressing the idea of schooling as far as just looking in the eyes of students and dealing with their emotional needs and their needs to socialize. And I think kids probably do need to learn how to deal with kids their own age and kids that are older and younger, and adults who, in the teacher's cases, often can be bullies, and just the perfect primordial examples of dealing with bad bosses, which so many people are going to be dealing with bad bosses. And so, yeah, there's just a lot of problems with that. Now, at some point, yeah, maybe we would get to a point where AI is good enough that it could teach kids and be supplemental to the point where school becomes more of a socializing experience, where is another looter looking game, so I'm just going to move forward. Probably shouldn't even point it out. There might be a point where school just becomes about socializing and dealing with other people, which there's not enough of that already in schools. But yeah, we're not to that point. Yeah, there definitely is a possibility that by the time kids graduate in 10 years, they will just have some kind of AI assistant in their phones that tells them the right scientific answer to scientific questions. The same way that calculators are on phones now and can tell you all of that information too. But yeah, there is still something also very heavily important about giving more standard education to kids, regardless of how good it is. You want it to be as good as possible, but in general, if you're going to create a society, you need a shared common experience as much as you can. And if one group of kids are being taught by AI and the next group of kids are being taught just normal people by normal teachers, that's not really a shared common experience to grow on. Alright, well, even at that, you can see that there really still isn't a ton of new games. This one was from January 2nd, and so there basically wasn't even a single game from today that I decided to make a YouTube short on. So, yeah. That being said, between taking a bathroom break and rambling and all of that, I have managed to go 2 hours and 43 minutes. And so that's going to be it for this stream. Let me know what you think about the new title, the new minute-long latency. You probably would only recognize the latency at all based on just if you were trying to chat directly into the chat, which that won't be too much of an issue. The closed captions being available auto-generated, that should be helpful for people too. So hopefully I've made some small tweaks here that I could make. I have some thoughts for some bigger tweaks that would take more work in the future. But yeah, starting January and 2025 off correctly this time, instead of being concerned about getting a channel strike. That's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.